We're still in the epistles of Paul. Since we skipped this for Thanksgiving, we're just on lesson 4 in the epistles. And I told you guys I was just going to just do a real quick overview of 2 Corinthians. And it's just another letter written to the Corinthian church. And we're going to dive into Galatians here. But 2 Corinthians, remember the church at Corinth was established or founded around 50, 51 after Christ, okay? And Paul had spent, about 18 months there in the founding of that church. And we went over all this in 1 Corinthians. He had written a letter, before 1 Corinthians. He had received a letter, and he had received, mouth to mouth or whatever, eyewitness testimonies from there. In 1 Corinthians, he was responding to these things that he had heard from Corinth. And he wrote 1 Corinthians while he was in Ephesus, around 54, 55. But then there was a visit that was made to the church in Corinth. And if you look with me just real quick, we're going to reference a couple of scriptures. But in chapter 2 of 2 Corinthians, verse 1, it says, "But I determined this with myself, that I would not come again to you in heaviness. For if I make you sorry, who is he that maketh me glad, but the same which is made sorry by me? And I wrote this same unto you, lest when I came I should have sorrow from them of whom I ought to rejoice." And so there was some point here Paul went and visited Corinth. And it's talking here about a visit that he made that caused heaviness. So this was a personal visit by Paul. Look with me too in 2 Corinthians 13. In verse 2 it says, "I told you before and foretell you as if I were present the second time, and being absent now I write to them which heretofore have sinned, and to all other that, if I come again, I will not spare." Again, he's talking about if I come another time. Now, he's not talking about the first time he was there founding the church. He's saying in between that and the letters that were written, he finally made a visit there. And he must have really, remember he told them first time, "How do you want me to come? You want me to come with a rod?" And it pretty much sounds like he got there and he set some things in order personally. Remember before he said, "I've already judged this man. I've judged the incestuous person in spirit not even being there." And then Paul ends up going there. And according to verse 1, it was in heaviness. He said, "I don't want to come to you again in heaviness." And when heaviness, that speaks of, judgment. I don't want to come to you again like that. And after this painful visit, he writes this letter, or he writes a severe chastising letter. Look in 2 Corinthians 2:4. He says, "For out of much affliction and anguish of heart I wrote unto you with many tears, not that you should be grieved, but that you might know the love which I have more abundantly unto you." So they received a grievous letter from Paul. And I'm just thumbing through some stuff here. Chapter 7 and verse 6. "Nevertheless, God that comforteth those that are cast down comforted us by the coming of Titus, and not by his coming only, but by the consolation wherewith he was comforted in you, when he told us your earnest desire, your mourning, your fervent mind toward me, so that I rejoice the more. For though I made you sorry with a letter, I do not repent. Though I did repent, for I perceive that the same epistle hath made you sorry, though it were but for a season." So he's saying he sent a letter that corrected and chastised the church. He sent it by Titus, and then Titus came back and gave a report. Hey, it had effect. They cried, they repented, they got straight with God. And so now he's writing 2 Corinthians after all this has happened. And he's in Macedonia, probably still going one more time to Corinth, and we're around 55 or 56 after Christ. We're going to find the last visit that he makes to Corinth is in Acts chapter 20. If you're just trying to put a chronology to all these events. And so now he's still got another trip to make to Corinth, and he writes this letter, 2 Corinthians, based, on the painful visit that he made that Acts doesn't mention, and based on this severe letter that he wrote to the Corinthians. And both of those things, the visit that he made, where it was a really heavy and sad visit, and then this really chastising letter. Now he writes 2 Corinthians, and it's interesting. It's talking about consolation and being comforted. He starts right off with comfort, and with the same affliction that you receive, comfort others. And we're just going to leave you with that. We're not going to go through it. There's a lot of things that are rehashed out, and doesn't mean that it's not important just because of time. We're going to move on. We spent enough time with the Corinthians and 1 Corinthians. Okay? So I'll just leave that book to you guys. Study it. Give you a little foundation where it comes from. And we want to go on and get to the epistle of Paul to the Galatians.